And I'm especially grateful to have the opportunity today to talk about threats to our democracy, especially from China and our foreign adversaries, because these threats to our democracy and global and domestic security are very real, and America needs to wake up. Because if we do not take action in this chamber, the threats to global and domestic security will have significant and devastating impacts for the United States. And the single largest threat at this very moment right now is members across the aisle this week who are holding up a foreign aid package to Ukraine and Taiwan. Because let me be clear, if we don't support our allies in Europe and then the Pacific, we could be on the verge of a major war in which American service members would be deployed. So we have to get this foreign aid package. Now, I want to be clear about the threats of the Chinese government as it's currently configured. As a member of the Indo-Pacific Task Force, which is a bipartisan task force, I personally traveled to meet with our allies in the Pacific this summer. And I want to tell all of you that the threat is real. Our allies, who thousands of Americans fought for and died for in World War II, are afraid of the Chinese government and the economic and military threat that they pose to their democracies. They are our allies. They are who is helping to uphold democracy in the Pacific. And if we do not take the moment and seize the moment right now to ensure that we are supporting our allies like Taiwan, it could be devastating for peace in the Pacific. In fact, one of my staff who traveled to Taiwan, similar to Representative Krishnamurti, just a few months ago, heard directly from civil society organizations in Taiwan who said in the wake of the invasion by Putin in Ukraine, they had begun doing drills in case of a Chinese invasion in Taiwan. The Chinese are watching what we do right now. And our first and best defense is to support our allies and to root out any activity here in the United States that is undermining our ability to respond to this threat. So while I appreciate that my friends across the aisle are trying to divert from a very real threat, the reality is that we have members, including members who are sitting here in this room today, that are repeating Russian and Chinese disinformation that has been planted in the US media and milieu to undermine our action against our adversaries. In fact, the chairman, the Republican chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee, called it out just the last few weeks. He said that members of his own party are repeating disinformation that is undermining action on Ukraine and on US military support to our allies. He said it had infected his party. It was being repeated on the floor of the House. We've seen examples of this, in fact, in both chambers. We have members of both chambers who have been repeating Russian disinformation, as you can see here. And in this very committee, we spent months holding a fake impeachment proceeding based on Russian disinformation that had been planted in the media by a Russian agent. Members in this committee were repeating that information. So if we want to root out threats to American democracy, to global security, we have to wake up. Now, Dr. Snyder, you're a historian. I'm grateful that you're here. Please help us understand the significance of this moment. I'm struck as we are facing, as the leader of the Democratic Party has said, a Churchill versus Chamberlain-like moment. If we do not act on Ukraine, we could see global threats to our peace and democracy.
Number one, and most narrowly, it's impossible to disentangle Chinese and Russian propaganda when Chinese channels transmit Russian memes. Number two, slightly more broadly, the way political warfare works is that things that start in China or Russia end up in our minds and then coming out of our mouths. That's what political warfare is precisely. And then number three, the direct connection between Ukraine and China, which everyone in Taiwan understands and repeats, is that insofar as they resist successfully, the Ukrainians are deterring Chinese offensive operations in the Pacific. And they're deterring them in a way that we cannot deter, because nothing Ukraine does can possibly be understood as provocative by Beijing. They have a power which we don't have, which is to make a war in the Pacific much less likely. If you let the Ukrainians go, we lose many, many things, but also we lose that.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, I just want to say history is watching.
Yes, I agree. Chair now recognizes Mr. Burleson from Missouri.
Mr. Chairman, Admiral Haynes, the Director of National Intelligence, had a statement recently. It said the CCP presents both the leading and most consequential threat to U.S. national security and leadership globally. And its intelligence-specific ambitions and capabilities make it, for us, our most serious and consequential intelligence rival. That being said, I was shocked, this question for you, Mr. Mattis, I was shocked to hear about a program that the CCP uses with the United Front to target and control Chinese Americans and the Chinese diaspora in the United States. What is their goal?
The goal in representing those, or having control over those kinds of community organizations, in part has to do with using their voices, hijacking their voices, if you will, to represent them to their congressional members and to their political leaders, right? Because you can't possibly meet with every single constituent and solicit their opinion and have it engage in a conversation. You have to deal with groups of all kinds, right? Whether they are through unions, through voluntary associations. And therefore, you can have an organization of entirely patriotic Americans with one bad apple in a leadership position who, by virtue of that position, can now
is the voice for that group.
And the other thing is that when those groups meet with politicians, and that image is often transmitted back into the PRC, Chinese people recognize what those groups are. And that's a message from the CCP to the Chinese people that not only are we in control here,
but we control you there.
And you will not get rescue from them.
And that being said, since 2014, the CCP has overseen an extra-legal operation for repatriation called Operation Fox Hunt. They use Operation Fox Hunt to harass and stalk Chinese Americans and the Chinese diaspora. Could you describe this campaign, and would you consider it political warfare?
I'm not sure if I would consider it political warfare, but I would consider it a violation of U.S. sovereignty by a foreign power, right? They're conducting operations on our soil that are affecting American citizens. They are deliberately avoiding any judicial channels for dealing with a law enforcement matter. And they say that it is under the guise of anti-corruption, and indeed some of it may be a corrupt official, but as we've seen from Xi Jinping's campaign internally, some of the people that are targeted are very clearly targeted for their political reasons, and corruption is simply an excuse.
Yeah, so what are the methods or tactics that they're using? I know I've heard that they have organized policing groups that are located in the United States.
Yes, and those groups have been used to hire sort of private investigators to sort of pursue and look. In some cases where there are direct confrontations with the victim to be repatriated back to the PRC, they are showing, say, pictures of family members or calling family members in Beijing or in the PRC to demonstrate that, look, if you're not on a plane back, then this will be the last.
So they're threatening the family members that are still in China,
yes,
and saying if you don't repatriate back or come to heel,
if you're not back in the PRC in X amount of time, then this will be the end for it.
Just this year, one of the Operation Fox Hunt's top official met with the Deputy Secretary Advisor John Feiner and Secretary of State Anthony Blinken. Could you explain how this might represent elite capture?
Look, I don't think that something like that kind of meeting would represent elite capture. If you were trying to get particular messages into the system, if you were trying to tell the PRC what is acceptable or not, you're going to have to deal with those security authorities, and you're going to have to press the message there.
But you think that there is a risk for U.S. officials who are meeting with CCP officials that are in charge of these repatriation efforts? Obviously, they're seeking out these meetings.
Again, if you were trying to have any impact on the Ministry of Public Security or the Ministry of State Security, you cannot meet with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So you will have to meet with them. That's simply the nature of dealing with those governments.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Raskin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Professor Snyder, what role does political and financial corruption play in the authoritarian regimes like China and Russia?
It always plays a very fundamental role, as we discussed before, in recruitment, but it also plays an ideological role. Since the basic argument is that democracies are just hypocrisy, everyone is basically corrupt, only money matters. Corruption is used not just as a way to bring in individuals, but it's also used as a way to discredit the entire system.
And internally, those regimes are based on corruption.
And so the point externally is to normalize that. Back in the 20th century, we had rivals that had other visions of the future. Now we don't. Now we have rivals, and this pertains both to China and Russia, whose main message is that our system isn't what it seems to be. There are really no alternatives to just autocratic regimes where only money and power count.
One of our colleagues chided our side of the aisle for raising Donald Trump's name. I think that was presumably directed at Representative Norton, who discussed the millions of dollars that Donald Trump pocketed in unlawful foreign government emoluments from the Chinese government and from the state-owned ICBC Bank while he was president. Is corruption in America irrelevant to our ability to withstand foreign propaganda by authoritarian regimes like China and Russia?
Of course it's not irrelevant, it's very relevant. The way that any kind of political warfare proceeds is by these sorts of connections. A message becomes more plausible because a person is a bit more corrupt. A person is a bit more corrupt, a message becomes a bit more plausible. Anyone who is serious about political warfare would be very attentive to these underlying financial issues, of course.
One of our colleagues mentioned an effort that is underway to stop U.S. government agencies from blowing the whistle on Chinese and Russian propaganda on social media. There are some people who say that it violates the First Amendment if our agencies say there's Chinese propaganda on your website, there's Russian propaganda on your website. What do you think about that? Do you think that in a free society, the government should be able at least to alert the social media or private internet service providers about the existence of foreign government propaganda on their vehicles?
Colleagues in different ways have already raised the point that that TikTok is not the only problem. The problem is the way that social media is designed as such. Democracies tend to work better when institutions are set up in such a way that factuality has an advantage over propaganda. Unfortunately, social media is set up in a different way. It gives an advantage, a financial advantage for advertisers to attention seeking and therefore to shocking propaganda. We know that this can be mediated because when attempts have been made, either by corporations themselves in cooperation or by the government, we have been able to dramatically reduce hostile state-sponsored propaganda. What we face now in 2024 is a major corporation, Twitter, which has chosen not to police itself even as much as the other platforms do. And therefore, we face a situation in which states are taking advantage of this sort of chaos. Hostile actors take advantage of this chaos to change the information environment. This is par excellence an example of psychological warfare, and it would be foolish if the United States government did not allow itself to draw attention to it.
I wonder if you can help us figure out where we've come as a committee, Professor Snyder. About a year ago, our GOP colleagues began heralding an FBI form, FD 1023, that recorded allegations that President Biden acted corruptly in Ukraine and tried to promote these as credible allegations. It turned out that these were lies, and the person who was promoting them has been indicted for lying to the FBI and constructing a false record. It turns out that he was up to his neck in connections to Russian foreign agents, and yet our colleagues at various points called this a smoking gun, said it showed proof that the Bidens took bribes, and so on. Chairman Jason Smith, for example, said this was a smoking gun, and it was the definitive proof that the Bidens took bribes. It's obviously been dropped, and yet this was the genesis of our investigation. How do we understand?
That's just simply not true, but go ahead.
I'll yield to the chairman if you want to take some more time.
No.
Well, you can use
Are
your
you
time.
saying the bank statements are Russian disinformation, that the Bidens took $9,000 from
Oh, I
China?
agree. You've been talking about
Tony
bank
Bobulinski
statements for
said
more
it
than a
was
year, but they don't show anything other than there was no crime.
So
Well,
it's
what do your bank
okay. It's
statements
okay
show?
for, as Tony Bobulinski said, for China to bribe Joe Biden's family with $9 million.
But that's the lie that's been discredited. I mean, where is your impeachment investigation? If Joe Biden took a $9 million bribe from China, why aren't you impeaching him for that?
Well, who says we're not?
Well, I can invite Mr. Moskowitz to come back in. Do you want to move for impeachment today? Because I thought that was your main agenda item. You said it was the paramount priority of the committee.
No, this is a hearing on China, and you all have an obsession with Russia and Trump. It's disturbing.
We can talk
You
about
need
China
therapy.
and Trump or Russia
You all
and
need,
Trump. He's got
you need therapy, Mr. Raskin.
No. You need therapy. You're the one who's involved with the deranged politician, not me, okay? I've divorced myself from Donald Trump a long time ago. You're the one who needs to disentangle from that situation. And I will tell you this. If you believe that it would have been illegal for Joe Biden to take $5 million from Ukraine, it certainly would have been. What do you think about Donald Trump taking more than $5 million from the Chinese government while he was president?
Well, we know that Donald Trump had a legitimate business that he talked about and he campaigned on.
The legitimate business was the White House.
What business?
He sold the White House.
Oh, give me a break.
He was
What business was what business were the Bidens in?
Well,
what business did Joe Biden's family own? What business were they in? Did they have hotels? Did they have a social media company? Did they have golf courses? Did they have casinos? Did they have office buildings?
Mr. Chairman.
What business? Did they have an energy
Mr.
company?
Chairman, we have spent tens of millions of dollars pursuing
Joe
Joe Biden, and you have not
true.
identified
That
a
is
single
lie.
crime.
You are
Really?
lying. That
Really?
is a lie. We have not spent $10 million.
Hey, how much have you spent?
We haven't spent hardly anything.
Oh, it's been for free. Okay. All right. Well, in any event, wait, you know what? Then we get what we paid for because you got nothing. You got nothing on Joe Biden.
No. Answer
You've
this
not
question.
named a single
Answer this
crime.
question.
No,
what did the Bidens do? What business were they in? Why did they get
can I answer
millions
that?
and millions of dollars?
Well, no, I would like
Can
to
I
ask you
answer
a
what
question.
you
No,
did?
you start. What
Okay,
did the Bidens do?
I don't know
What
who you're
business
talking
were they
about.
in?
Well, what business is the COMERs in? You're talking about lots of people. There's lots of people in the
I'm
family.
a farmer.
Your
I have
impeachment-
land. I
Your
lease land.
impeachment
I sell honey.
investigation must identify
What
a
did the
high
Bidens
crime and
do?
misdemeanor.
What did they do?
I'll
for
tell
the
you what Joe
millions of
Biden
dollars?
did. He was a senator of the United States. Then he wrote a book, and he said he made the most money he ever made in his life, millions of dollars on his book, and he gave $1 million
That's
away
what
to
his
charity.
family did. That's why Ukraine, Kazakhstan, Romania, China, Russia, that's why they paid the Biden family money because of Joe Biden.
None of those governments paid anyone any money.
Somebody needs therapy here, but it's nobody on our side of the aisle, okay?
All right, enough.
No,
Back to the
honestly,
China hearing. Back to the China
you
hearing.
had your chance.
Order,
I would
order.
like my time restored.
Well, no, your time was
I would like
expired.
you-
I've
no,
given
you
3 extra
interrupted
minutes.
me. I want my
No,
time
you
restored.
had your time. You went above, and I'll let Ms. Thornton go a minute.
You know what?
Here,
Yeah.
sit down, everybody, come back. This is about China. We asked a simple question. Now, Ms. Presley, you're out of order. Sit down.
Mr.
You're
Chairman,
out of order.
Mr. Chairman,
No.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman,
Mr.
can I make a motion that we take a break for 5 minutes?
We're going to keep going. we'll let the record show that Mr. Raskins could not answer the question.
First of all,
what did the Bidens do to receive the money?
Let me start with this. My last name is Raskin, okay? We've sat next to each other for more than a year. You don't have to add the S. Number two, I would like my time restored. And number three,
No, you have
not
your time. You're
identified
out
a
of
single
order.
crime.
No.
Well, what is the crime that you want to impeach Joe Biden for and keep this nonsense going?
Well,
Why? What is the crime? Tell America right now. You can have the rest of
you're
my
about
time.
to find out.
What
very
is the
soon.
crime?
You're about to find out
Name
very
it.
soon. Chair
We
now
inhabit
recognizes
a
Mr.
propaganda
Biggs from
experiment.
Arizona.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Colonel Newsham, yokoso. Yeah. We could talk in Japanese for a few minutes, but that might take us further anyway. But glad to have you here. Welcome everyone here. I'll begin. I'm going to focus on China. I'll start, Mr. Mattis. Your question for you first is: has Chinese propaganda penetrated into the United States of America?
I think you can safely say that it has, but I think the point of my testimony was to point out that this is more than just narratives, that we should be concerned with the actions that result.
Right, I'm going to get into that, but I'm talking about just initially about propaganda. That's penetrated as well, right? I mean,
the messages certainly reach. So, yes.
Okay. And then I'll go to Colonel Newsham. My questions for you is you mentioned in your written testimony hacking of U.S. military technology. Have we covered that today?
Not yet, sir, but couple examples I used were the hacking of basically the plans for the C-17 transport, the F-35 fighter, and the Chinese have built a couple things that look an awful lot like those.
And do we have evidence that how they were able to hack that technology, to acquire that technology?
I believe there's a pretty good understanding of that. It was partly human access that allowed them to get the computer access, but also they have computer hackers on a scale you can hardly imagine. They've got plenty of resources to devote to it.
And then this will be for you, Colonel Newsham, and Mr. Mattis. Maybe this is what you wanted to get at too. In your written testimony, Colonel Newsham, you mentioned physical penetration or infiltration, and in particular, you point to what I would call South China Sea assets that China is trying to acquire. In relationship to actually U.S. assets there, like the Northern Mariana Islands, et cetera. Can you want to take just a few seconds and expand on that, please?
Sure. Just regards to South China Sea, the Chinese had de facto control of that at least 7 or 8 years ago, long before Ukraine ever came along. They are now going after American territories and parts of America in Commonwealth of Northern Marianas and in Guam. Coming through the borders, and in CNMI's case, it's with the approval of our own Department of Homeland Security, which gives visa-free access. Once they're in, they're causing all sorts of trouble. They've picked up Chinese around, wandering through the jungles around U.S. bases in Guam as well.
And that gets me to something that General Spalding wrote in his written testimony, where you said, and I'm going to quote it: "The relaxation of our security posture concerning active measures conducted by adversaries like China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran has left American institutions like those of its allies and entire international order vulnerable to relentless and ongoing political influence campaigns." Do you want to elaborate on that in connection with what we've been talking about with the physical infiltration, or the propaganda infiltration as well?
Well, one of the ways that that happens is because we relaxed COCOM. So COCOM prevented both us and our allies from trading with the Soviet Union, and through that trade, through that financial and economic relationship, is their biggest lever for political influence within the United States and its allies and the international system.
Thank you, General. And I would just say, before we go further, I did read one of your books, General Spalding, and actually one of Dr. Snyder's books on tyranny. So I have some familiarity. If you other two have written books, I haven't read those books yet. I'll try to track those down as well. And then I want to get back to you, Mr. Mattis. One of the things you were talking about, you wanted to talk more than the psychological or the infiltration or penetrations of psychology by China.
So, for example, in technology transfer, it's not simply computer network exploitation of companies or labs, but you see United Front organizations sort of building a sort of, I guess you could call it a fake community organization in the United States for Chinese and science and technology. And those organizations, or in some cases the organizations back in the PRC, have memorandums of understanding with U.S. professional organizations. And those associations basically work with the talent program to identify potential Americans that should be brought over to the PRC to contribute their knowledge and expertise. And I think we sometimes think of this too narrowly as a classified issue, or that we say that all science is published, when those soft skills of managing a lab, the experience of failed experiments, are all valuable pieces of knowledge and wisdom that are beneficial to running large labs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My time has expired, but I do have a couple of items I would like to submit for the record, and just say that 25 years ago, when I was working on graduate work in Northeast Asian security, China was a huge issue even then, for very different reasons, but they were emerging they had hegemonic ambitions at that time. And if you go back, you'll see that they had hegemonic ambitions literally forever in China. So I would submit a couple things for the record, Mr. Chairman. One of them is the testimony that was submitted to the United States Senate before the Emerging Threats and Spending Oversight Subcommittee on the Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs, entitled Strengthening International Cooperation to Stop the Flow of Fentanyl into the United States, of March 20th, 2024.
Without objection, so ordered.
And another piece, rather old, with a, I don't mean to, the title's offensive, but it was a book review of one of Mr. Snyder's books from September 9th, 2014, called Timothy Snyder's Lies by Daniel Lazar.
Without objection, so ordered.
Yield. Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair now recognizes Mr. Garcia from California.
Thank you. Been a wild hearing so far. I know that the majority is very interested in looking into China. I think we should definitely look into the influence China plays in our politics. And I just want to start by reminding us of this man. And I'm sure that our chairman and my Republican colleagues will recognize this gentleman over here. This, of course, is Gal Luft. We know that a Chinese spy, Gal Luft, infiltrated this committee's sham impeachment inquiry against President Biden with false allegations. Now, according to his federal indictment, Gal paid a former U.S. government official who was a Donald Trump advisor to, quote, publicly support certain policies favorable to China. He also sold Chinese arms around the world. Now, our chairman, who wanted this gentleman to be a witness, called him, quote, a very credible witness. This is a Chinese spy we're talking about, just because Gal Luft was willing to help Republicans smear the president. So when we're talking about China's influence, it starts with the House majority, our chairman, wanting to have a witness, this man, who actually was a Chinese spy. So it's completely ridiculous for Republicans to claim to get tough on China while they're working with literal Chinese agents to spread misinformation. Goes to show you what a joke this is. Now, this isn't, of course, the only example of the majority's hypocrisy.
Will the gentleman yield to a question?
I'm going to keep going, sir, because we know that one of the most important tools to stop hostile foreign influence in our government is the Constitution. Now, Professor Snyder, what role does the Emoluments Clause of the Constitution play in protecting against foreign influence?
Since it seems to be the rule here that people jump around a bit, I'm just going to respond to the absent questioner.
Actually, sorry, I need you to respond to just to...
I will, trust me. But the item that was entered into the record regarding me, when members read it, they will find that it is the Stalinist objection to Timothy Snyder that they have entered into the record. That book review is from the point of view of someone defending the one-party Leninist state, which colleagues and I believe
Thank you, sir. I just need
is the problem.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, the Emoluments Clause is a fundamental example of the wisdom of the founders in recognizing the possibility of financial corruption in the head of state.
Thank you. And the Emoluments Clause is very important. We know that foreign influence on a president is clearly a serious threat, and the evidence is clear, as our ranking member mentioned. We have actually evidence that China funneled cash to Donald Trump through his businesses while he was president. That is illegal, and it threatens national security. The Trump International Hotel, more stays at the hotel in Vegas, Trump Tower, over $5.5 million. The People's Republic of China, including state-owned enterprises, made unconstitutional payments in excess of 5.5 to the Trump Organization. And those millions into Donald Trump's pockets are just a small sample of the total payments we received. And as a reminder, our chairman actually cut off the investigation into Trump's business activities. So we only have documentation for about 2 years. Now, just months ago, the Republicans blocked my motion to subpoena Donald Trump's accountants for their records on this cover-up, which is an absolute crime. And in 2016, Trump said, "I love China. The biggest bank in the world is from China." The Department of Justice found that that same bank was being used as a front to funnel money into North Korea. I also want to talk about, it's not just about China, of course. We can document illegal money going into Trump's businesses while he was president from multiple companies, from multiple countries and companies. We know from China, 5.5 million, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, from all of these countries, there was illegal foreign payments made violating the Emollients Clause. And this is only a small sample. We also know that this is a broader part of the grift that the Trump family is doing on the American people. We know that Donald Trump, for example, gave his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, a job at the White House. We know that his son put together a $110 billion arms deal with the Saudi government. We know that Jared Kushner received a $2 billion investment fund from the Saudi government after just leaving the White House, just a month after leaving the White House. And so there's a lot of corruption that we can talk about. And even though Chairman Comer wants to invite spies that are working with China, doesn't want to investigate the payments that Trump was receiving from foreign governments, these are things that must be talked about and investigated. Professor Snyder, is it acceptable for a former U.S. official to get $2 billion from a foreign government for an investment fund right after leaving office?
That is totally unacceptable.
Thank you. And that's exactly what the Trump family is doing, continues to do, and to continue to put this huge grift on the American people. Mr. Comer, would you like to ask me a question?
Yeah. Are you aware that Gal Luft was charged by the Department of Justice for violating the Foreign Agents Registration Act because of the money he took from CEFC, which is the exact same company that paid the Bidens millions of dollars, the same company that Tony Bobulinski testified that Joe Biden was the big guy in a deal with?
Mr. Chairman Comer, are you aware that you called him a very credible witness, yet he's a Chinese spy?
Well, then is Hunter Biden and Joe, are they Chinese
sir,
spies?
you called Gal Luft a very credible witness who happened to be
He's a
Chinese
credible
spy.
witness because he worked for the same company that Hunter and Biden and Joe
For
Biden
the
got
record,
paid for,
for
and
the
Jill
record,
Biden.
for the record, our
Hunter Biden.
chairman,
It's the
is
same
saying
deal.
that a Chinese spy working for the Chinese government against the United States of America is a very credible witness. I yield back.
Credible because he got paid by the same company the Bidens got paid for. The same thing.
The same company that gave millions of dollars to Donald Trump when he was president?
No, it's the same company that paid the Bidens millions of dollars. For what business was it? Again, Mr. Raskin, what business were the Bidens in? I forgot what you said.
Can you stop saying the Bidens?
Jim
paid
Biden.
Hunter
Jim
Biden.
Biden was a businessman.
No.
Government official. Mr. Comer, can we have
Joe
some
Biden is a
decorum?
public servant.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Fallon from Texas.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. You know, I woke up this morning and I was reviewing my notes, and how naive am I that I thought that this hearing could actually be bipartisan when we're talking about threats that the Chinese Communist Party presents to the United States of America. Wow. Well, I don't care if you're a Democrat or a Republican. We live in this country, and this country is threatened by the Chinese Communist Party. So no doubt there are a great many threats. There's a multitude facing our country. It's our job in Congress to determine the greatest threats to our United States national security and our future prosperity, and then to address them. We have to prioritize them. What are the most dire threats? And then let's work to either eliminate them or mitigate them to a significant degree. In my humble opinion, it's rather obvious what the greatest threats are. One, it's our deficit spending and our accumulated debt, and two, it's the Chinese Communist Party. But this is not a hearing, Mr. Chairman, on the deficit or the debt. It is not a hearing on Russia. It's a hearing on the Chinese Communist Party. I'm not here to talk about Joe Biden today. I'm here to talk about the Chinese Communist Party. And it's sad when you hear these buzzwords from the ranking member and other Democrats. They say Russia, Ukraine, Nazis, MAGA, collusion, Russian hoax. When the Mueller investigation found that there was no collusion, it truly was a Russian hoax. Reality proves quite the opposite. Professor Schneider, what new territory of another nation state did Vladimir Putin violate in 2008?
Georgia.
And who was president in 2008?
President of the Russian Federation
United States of America.
was Vladimir Putin.
Of the United States of America.
Obama.
In 2014, what new territory of another nation state did Vladimir Putin violate?
Ukraine.
Ukraine. Crimea and eastern Ukraine, correct?
That is correct.
And who was the president then?
Obama.
Okay. In 2022, what new territory of another nation state did Vladimir Putin violate?
Ukraine.
Full-scale invasion trying to grab Kyiv, correct?
Correct.
And who was president then?
Biden.
Joe Biden. From January of 2017 to January of 2021, what new territory of another nation state did Vladimir Putin violate?
There were no military invasions.
There were no new territories violated by Vladimir Putin. You are correct.
Yes, although
and who was president then?
Of the Russian Federation.
The United States of America from January 2017 to January 2021.
You're repeating the question. It was Joe Biden.
No, from 2017 to 2021, who was the president of the United States?
Oh, sorry, Donald Trump.
Donald J. Trump.
That's right.
So, reality shows us that there was only one U.S. president in the last 3, or 4 rather, that could either control or contain Vladimir Putin, and that was Donald J. Trump. So that could be possibly an inconvenient truth to our friends across the aisle, but nonetheless, it is the truth. General Spalding, who has a greater GDP, China or Russia?
China.
China. In fact, it's about almost 10 times as much. And Colonel Newsham, who has a greater population, China or Russia?
China.
China, by about 10 times. So who's the greater threat? It's rather obvious it's China, whereas President Trump would say China. General Spalding, has the United States intelligence community accurately identified the threat that the CCP presents?
No, and I believe that's a direct result of the influence within Washington, D.C., particularly on think tanks.
In what ways has the intelligence community failed to address the CCP threat?
When I started, working with the Defense Intelligence Agency, they were primarily focused on the military threat coming from China. They weren't focused on the economic threat, the financial threat, the academic threat, the political threat that we're talking about here.
So, for instance, in just a few years ago, before Joe Biden took office, there were about less than 500 Chinese nationals that were apprehended on the southern border. And then the last year we have data for, last fiscal year, it was nearing 50,000. You find that alarming?
Terrifying.
Do you think every one of those folks is just looking for a better life, or are there some sleeper agents looking to do us harm if we ever got into a hot war with China?
I think both of those situations exist, but I also think that the Chinese Communist Party is opportunistic, and it has conditioned the Chinese citizens to believe that they must do what the Chinese Communist Party asks. So every Chinese citizen that comes into the country, by law, is a Chinese agent of the Chinese Communist Party.
And even if 99% of them are just looking for a better life, it's terrifying to know that there are 500 new potential threats in this country in an open society.
Well, Li Yuan, who's a journalist for the New York Times, talks about the deprogramming she herself had to go through when she came to the United States and started recognizing the signs of having been programmed. And I think if you're going to have those types of people come into the country, then they have to go through some similar deprogramming process, because if you live in China, like I have, you see that the entire population has been programmed through propaganda over the last decade, certainly since Tiananmen Square.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes Ms. Lee from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Earlier this month, the Institute for Strategic Dialogue, an independent nonprofit team of disinformation.
Should we use the expression made to sit on his backside with doorknobs and keep quiet in the corner? That's a very polite way of describing Jamie Raskin literally obliterating to his face, by the way, to his face, James, I have nothing, COMER.
So
Well,
it's
what are your
okay.
bank
It's
statements
okay
show?
for, as Tony Bobolinsky said, for China to bribe Joe Biden's family with $9 million.
But that's the lie that's been discredited. I mean, where is your impeachment investigation? If Joe Biden took a $9 million bribe from China, why aren't you impeaching him for that?
Well, who says we're not?
Well, I can invite Mr. Moskowitz to come back in. Do you want to move for impeachment today? Because I thought that was your main agenda item. You said it was the paramount priority of the committee.
No, this is a...